From the moment Janet set foot on the military base, she became the target of relentless humiliation and cruelty at the hands of Patrick. Day after day, she endured sneers, impossible tasks, and verbal assaults, all designed to break her spirit. For weeks, Janet tried to stay invisible, avoiding Patrick at all costs, suppressing her frustration and anger, telling herself that keeping her head down was the safest way to survive. But there was a breaking point. One day, Patrick's voice cut through the barracks, sharp and dripping with arrogance. "Why are you avoiding me?" The word struck Janet like a physical blow, and something inside her snapped. She could no longer contain the storm building in her chest. She stood tall, fists clenched, and unleashed all the fury she had been holding back, yelling at Patrick, calling him everything he deserved: arrogant, cruel, disgusting. The room fell silent, the other recruits frozen, as the raw truth of her words hung in the air. What would happen when Janet finally confronted Patrick? How far would she go to ensure justice was served? But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story really began. The sun over Coronado was merciless, hanging low and white in a cloudless sky, turning the asphalt of the grinder into a reflective furnace. Heat shimmered above the ground, invisible waves, distorting the outlines of the recruits standing in rigid formation. The air smelled of salt, sweat, and burned rubber. For Seaman Janet Morrison, the pain in her body had passed the point of screaming hours ago. Her quadriceps were locked in a permanent tremor from lob PT. Her shoulders felt partially dislocated from repeated boat carries. Salt crystals had dried on her skin, pulling tight every time she moved her jaw. She stood at attention anyway, chin level, eyes fixed dead ahead. No blinking unless absolutely necessary. In Bud's visibility was vulnerability. Janet had learned that early. For 6 weeks, she had reduced herself to minimal motion, minimal reaction. Eat fast, move efficiently, speak only when ordered. Do nothing that would draw attention from the wrong set of eyes. Those eyes were watching now. Admiral Patrick Wilson moved across the grinder with deliberate slowness, his white uniform immaculate despite the chaos around him. The gold stars on his collar caught the sun with every step. He didn't belong here. 4-star admirals didn't haunt training yards. They observed from balconies, issued directives through layers of command, stayed insulated from sweat and failure. Wilson did neither. He prowled. His aides followed to steps behind, clipboards tucked under their arms, faces carefully neutral. Wilson's gaze skimmed the line of recruits with disinterest until it landed on Janet. It lingered. A fraction too long. The corner of his right eye twitched once, a tell he didn't bother to suppress. He stopped directly in front of her. Janet felt him before she smelled him. The sharp intrusion of expensive cologne cut through the stench of the grinder, out of place and invasive. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. She kept her eyes forward, focused on a rust spot on a distant barricade. Wilson circled her slowly, boots crunching on sand that had been deliberately scattered to make footing unstable. He leaned in as if inspecting her posture, though her alignment was textbook: heels together, knees locked, spine straight, shoulders squared. "Seaman Morrison," he said softly. Her pulse spiked, then settled. She didn't respond. Recruits didn't speak unless spoken to directly. Wilson smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. He had been doing this since week 1. Correcting her when her form was flawless, ordering extra repetitions after she met the standard. Kicking sand into her face during surf torture under the pretense of motivation. Once, while she struggled under a 200-pound Ibs boat, he had leaned close enough for only her to hear and commented on the neighborhood where she'd grown up, details pulled from a personnel file he had no business memorizing. Predatory curiosity masquerading as leadership. Janet adjusted her breathing, slow and controlled through her nose, the way combat swimmers were trained. Panic wasted oxygen. She saw movement in her peripheral vision, Wilson's hand lifting, to fingers tapping lightly against his own chest as if bore. His aides exchanged glances. This was his ritual. He provoked. He waited. He fed on reaction. Janet gave him none. When the instructors dismissed the formation for a water break, Janet pivoted sharply and moved with purpose, slipping into the flow of bodies. She cut toward the chow line, then veered into an equipment cage, keeping obstacles between herself and the Admiral's line of sight. Evasion wasn't cowardice, it was tactics. It worked. Until it didn't. Near the medical bay, where the smell of antiseptic clashed with ocean air, a shadow crossed her path. A Humvee door slammed shut behind her. Wilson stood there, blocking the narrow corridor, his aides positioned like bookends. Janet halted instantly and snapped to attention, boots striking concrete with a clean, sharp crack. Her breathing steady, her face went blank. Wilson stepped forward, deliberately violating personal space. She could see the fine wrinkles around his eyes, the faint pulse at his temple. He tilted his head, studying her like an object that had failed to break on schedule. "Morrison," he drawled. "I've noticed something." His voice carried just enough to draw attention without sounding like a spectacle. Nearby corpsmen slowed. A few recruits froze mid-stride. "You seem to scurry away whenever I inspect the troops," he continued. Like a frightened animal, Janet's fingers curled inside her fists, nails pressing into skin. She didn't lower her gaze. Wilson leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Why are you avoiding me, recruit?" For a heartbeat, the world narrowed. She saw her father's face not as it had looked at the end, hollow and defeated, but as it had been in old photographs. Uniform pressed, eyes steady, a man who believed in the institution that destroyed him. The memory hit like cold water. Something inside her hardened. Janet lifted her eyes and met Wilson's gaze directly. "I avoid you, Admiral," she said, her voice clear, controlled, carrying across the courtyard with surgical precision. "Because you are disgusting." The air seemed to collapse inward. Conversations died mid-word. A gull screamed overhead. Wilson's expression froze, then fractured, jaw tightening, nostrils flaring, the tick in his eye returning in rapid succession. For the first time, he hadn't anticipated the move. The Admiral's face betrayed him for less than a second. The corners of Patrick Wilson's mouth pulled back, teeth flashing in something that was not a smile. A thin muscle jumped beneath his left eye, rapid and uncontrolled, before decades of cultivated authority slammed back into place. When he spoke again, his voice was level, almost conversational, but the word carried weight like a dropped blade. "Disgusting," he repeated it slowly, tasting it, as if committing it to memory for later use. His chin lifted a fraction. Around them, the grinder had gone unnaturally still. Instructors held their clipboards frozen against their chests. Recruits stared straight ahead, throats working, careful not to breathe too loudly. "You think a recruit," Wilson continued, stepping closer, "has the right to judge a four-star admiral?" Janet's shoulders remained squared. Her pulse hammered behind her ears, but she forced her breathing into a measured rhythm, for in, for hold, for out. Her fingers trembled at her sides, barely perceptible, knuckles blanching as she curled them tighter against her palms. "I think a sailor," she said, projecting without raising her voice, "knows the difference between a leader and a sadist, sir." The word "sir" landed with surgical precision. "Not deference, obligation." Wilson's lips pressed together, then he laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound, devoid of humor, the kind of laugh that existed only to signal ownership of the moment. He turned his head slightly toward the senior enlisted man standing a few feet away. The Master Chief's face had drained of color. A bead of sweat traced a slow line down his temple, despite the ocean breeze. "Master Chief," Wilson said, gesturing lazily with two fingers, "it appears Candidate Morrison has excess energy." He paused, glancing back at Janet, his gaze raking over her like an inspection meant to humiliate rather than correct. "She finds my presence distasteful," he added. "Let's see if she finds the Pacific Ocean more hospitable." The order was never spoken outright. It didn't need to be. Within minutes, Janet was marched to the surf zone. The temperature drop was immediate and violent. The Pacific in February was unforgiving water hovering just above 50 degrees, capable of stripping heat from the human core faster than the body could compensate. Wilson positioned himself well above the waterline, boots dry, arms folded neatly across his chest. One of his aides held a clipboard, another checked the perimeter. "Link arms," an instructor barked. Janet obeyed. The first wave hit her midsection, knocking the breath from her lungs in a sharp, involuntary gasp. The second surged higher, slamming into her chest, climbing toward her neck. Her jaw clenched as her body reacted, muscles tightening, blood vessels constricting in a desperate attempt to preserve heat. Time lost meaning. The surf pounded rhythmically, each wave a blunt instrument. Janet's lips went numb, then stiff. Her teeth began to chatter uncontrollably despite her efforts to lock her jaw. Fine motor control deteriorated, first fingers stiffening, grip weakening, classic early-stage hypothermia. Wilson checked his watch, a Rolex, stainless steel. The sun caught the face, reflecting a brief flash of light as he tilted his wrist. "Ring the bell. Morrison," he called out, his voice cutting cleanly through the wind and surf. "Just ring the bell and you can have a warm blanket and some hot coffee." Another wave broke over her head, filling her nose and mouth with salt water. She coughed, swallowed, forced herself to keep her feet planted in the shifting sand. "You don't belong here," Wilson added calmly. Janet's vision narrowed at the edges, colors dulled. Her core temperature continued to drop. She could feel it now, a deep, invasive cold that no amount of movement could dislodge. Her thoughts slowed, but one image remained sharp: her father, standing in dress uniform, the quiet pride in his eyes before the court-martial. The silence afterward, the empty chair at the table. The man laughing on the beach was the same man who had signed his life away. Janet leaned into the next wave instead of retreating from it. Hours passed. The sun sank low, then disappeared entirely. The cold became total, omnipresent. When they finally dragged her from the water, her legs failed beneath her. She hit the sand hard, hands scraping uselessly as she tried to push herself upright. Wilson approached, his shadow falling over her. He crouched just enough to meet her eye level, his expression satisfied, almost tender. "This is just day one of your new reality, Janet," he said quietly. "I will break you." He stood and turned away. Janet lay there, shivering violently, her body locked in autonomic response. Her gaze drifted not to the brass bell glinting under floodlights but to a folding chair near the waterline. Draped over it was Wilson's field jacket. The pocket gaped slightly, a sliver of black leather was visible. Janet closed her eyes, committing the detail to memory. If she survived the night, everything would change. The following week dissolved into a sequence of deliberate pressure points, each one applied with precision. Wilson no longer needed to appear constantly. His influence moved through the chain of command like a silent order. Instructors who had once enforced standards with professional detachment now lingered over Janet, eyes flat, voices clipped. Corrections became punishments, punishments became entrance tests with no training value. She felt it first in the small things, an extra minute in the front-leaning rest while others were released. A log assigned to her position alone, heavier and down. A look exchanged between instructors before her name was called. Careers were fragile things in naval special warfare. Wilson knew exactly where to apply leverage. Janet absorbed it. When they ordered her into the sandpit and commanded her to roll until every inch of exposed skin was coated, she complied without hesitation. The grains worked into abrasions on her elbows and neck, grinding against raw flesh until the sensation dulled into something distant and manageable. The instructors watched for a reaction. They got none. Her face remained blank, jaw set, eyes forward, salt and sand clinging to her eyelashes. "Sugar cookie," one of them shouted. Cold water followed. The sand hardened against her uniform, forming a crust that pulled at her skin every time she moved. Janet stood rigid as the Pacific wind cut through the damp fabric, her body shivering despite her control. She focused on the horizon, breathing through the discomfort, letting the pain pass through without resistance. In the pool, the cruelty sharpened. During pool competency, the water was clear and deceptively calm. Janet descended, regulator in place, heart rate steady. Halfway through the drill, resistance vanished. The familiar pull of air did not come. Her fingers tightened reflexively around the mouthpiece. No panic. She executed the checklist automatically: purge, tap, reseat, nothing. The realization settled cleanly. The regulator had been deliberately compromised. She signaled, kicked toward the surface, initiating an emergency ascent, exhaling steadily to prevent pulmonary overextension. The seconds stretched thin, her lungs burned. Black spots cracked at the edges of her vision. She broke the surface with a violent gasp, ripping the regulator free, coughing water onto the pool deck. An instructor's boot appeared inches from her face. "Recover and reset," he said flatly. Janet nodded once and complied. From the balcony above, Wilson watched, his expression unreadable. When Janet met the standard anyway, his jaw tightened. The tick returned, sharp and fast. Her refusal to fail became an irritation, an anomaly others noticed. Master Chief Reynolds had seen men break under less. He'd watched operators with combat ribbons and scar tissue crumble quietly during training, and done not by the physical demands, but by the realization that the institution would not bend for them. Janet Morrison did not bend. He began to observe her from a distance. He noted the timing of her punishments, the pattern of equipment failures that followed her. He watched an obstacle course adjusted just enough to increase the risk of injury without violating regulations on paper. He saw the way instructors avoided her eyes afterward. Late one night, long after lights out, Janet was on her knees in the barracks, scrubbing the floor with a stiff bristled brush. The smell of industrial cleaner burned her nose. Her shoulders ached with each movement. Water pooled around her hands, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. She sensed someone behind her. Reynolds stood near the doorway, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the far wall. He didn't acknowledge her at first. The silence stretched. "The Admiral has a habit of getting rid of problems," he said eventually. His voice was low, roughened by years of shouting over gunfire and rotor wash. "Usually, those problems disappear quietly." Janet kept scrubbing. The brush moved faster, harder. "Medical discharges," Reynolds continued. "Sudden transfers, careers that just end." "I'm not going anywhere, Master Chief," Janet said. Her breathing stayed controlled, but her grip tightened until the brush handle creaked faintly. "I know who your father was, Morrison." The brush stopped mid-stroke. Reynolds finally turned his head. "Commander David Morrison, good man. He was digging into misappropriation of classified funds. Accounting discrepancies tied to black programs." He paused, then he was framed for leaking intel. Wilson signed the investigation order. Janet's shoulders went rigid. She looked up slowly, eyes bright but dry. "He didn't just sign it, Master Chief," she said. "He pocketed the money." Reynolds studied her face, searching for cracks. "He found conviction instead. That's a heavy accusation for a recruit," he said. "You'd better have more than anger to back that up." "I don't have the proof yet," Janet admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I know where he keeps it. A black ledger. He carries it with him, writes everything down in codes. I saw it on the beach." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. A long moment passed. Then, quietly, "If you make a move against an Admiral and miss, you go to Leavenworth for 20 years. Do you understand?" Janet didn't hesitate. "I won't miss." Reynolds reached into his pocket. When he let go, a small, encrypted thumb drive clattered softly onto the wet floor between them. "Security logs from the Admiral's office," he said. "Don't make me regret this." Janet looked at the drive, then back up at him. She nodded once. The thumb drive felt heavier than it was. Janet could feel it even when it wasn't on her, an awareness lodged somewhere beneath the fatigue, beneath the constant ache in her joints. A piece of plastic and silicon that meant nothing without access, and access was the one thing Bud's recruits were systematically denying. No personal electronics, no unsecured terminals. Every keystroke on base was logged, flagged, audited. She turned the problem over during the margins of pain. On the 4-mile timed runs, lungs burning as lactic acid crept into her calves, she counted steps and contingencies instead of distance. During surf torture, as cold water hammered her core and stripped sensation from her extremities, she rehearsed angles and timing. The mind was still hers, even when the body was not. The base library was an option, but only partially. The terminals there were locked down, whitelisted for doctrine, naval history, and approved coursework. Every login tied to a service number, every search preserved. Plugging an unknown device into a monitored system would light up an audit trail like a flare. She needed a workaround, or leverage. Wilson provided both. Janet watched him with the same discipline she applied to marksmanship drills. Not opally. Never staring, she tracked him through reflections, shadows, peripheral vision. She noted patterns. He trusted no one but himself. He kept the ledger close, always on his person, always within reach. But his arrogance made him careless in one specific context: when he performed. When he instructed recruits, basking in authority and proximity, he abandoned caution. He left his jacket unattended, draped over railings, hung from truck mirrors, displayed like a trophy, not a vulnerability. No one would dare touch the belongings of a 4-star admiral. The assumption was absolute. Hell Week arrived like a slow-motion impact. 5.5 days, 4 hours of sleep total. Continuous evolution. Cognitive function degraded rapidly under sustained sleep deprivation. Janet felt it happening in real time. The edges of reality softened, sounds elongated. At one point, the surf whispered her name. She ignored it. The team was on the beach for boat carries, the ibs digging into shoulders already bruised purple and yellow. Sand stuck to sweat-slick skin. The sun was high, merciless. Wilson stood apart from the chaos, a thermos in one hand, posture relaxed. Steam rose faintly, and he unscrewed the lid. He shrugged out of his jacket with deliberate slowness, draping it over the side of a support truck. The black leather caught briefly on the metal frame before settling, the inner pocket sagging just enough to reveal weight. Janet noted the distance, 3 meters, 2 obstacles. One line of sight, Morrison. Wilson's voice cracked like a whip. She turned instantly. Get over here, front-leaning rest. She dropped into position without hesitation, palm sinking into hot sand. Her arms trembled under accumulated fatigue as she began the push-ups, body rigid, core engaged by reflex alone. Wilson circled her, boots crunching close to her hands. You're weak, he said, voice low and venomous. You don't belong here. Janet's elbows locked at the top of the movement. Her breathing stayed controlled, sharp exhale, shallow inhale. Just like your father, Wilson added casually, glancing toward the ocean. He broke under pressure too. Something flared behind her sternum. Adrenaline surge, sharp, pan-clarifying, cutting through the fog of exhaustion. Her hands pressed harder into the sand, knuckles whitening. Wilson turned away, already barking at another instructor. Janet let her arms buckle. She collapsed sideways, deliberately uncontrolled, shoulders striking sand as she rolled toward the truck. Shouts erupted. An instructor cursed. Someone grabbed for her ankle. In the chaos, the overlapping commands, the crash of waves, the scrape of boots, her hand reached upward. Leather brushed her fingertips. She felt the hard rectangle beneath the lining. The ledger, real, solid. Her fingers curled instinctively. Pain exploded through her wrist. A boot slammed down, pinning her hand to the metal frame. The pressure was precise, intentional, not enough to break bone, enough to warn. Janet sucked in a breath, teeth clenched, eyes snapping upward. Someone was standing over her, and the moment shattered. Pain detonated up her arm, sharp and electrical, locking her breath in her chest. Janet's head snapped up on instinct, jaw clenched hard enough that her teeth ached. For a fraction of a second, she expected to see Wilson's polished boots, the familiar insignia of unchecked authority. Instead, she met the eyes of Petty Officer Evans. He stood too close, his boot planted with surgical precision on her wrist, pinning it to the steel frame of the truck. He was younger than Wilson, his uniform immaculate, creases razor-sharp, boots free of sand despite the chaos around them. Aide-de-camp, gatekeeper, devotee. His face was flushed, not from exertion, but from proximity to power. His gaze flicked down to her hand, half hidden beneath the hanging jacket, then back to her face. His pupils dilated, a muscle jumped in his cheek. What are you doing, recruit? He demanded. Janet's pulse hammered so violently she could feel it in her throat. The world narrowed to pressure and sound, the crush of his boot, the hiss of surf, the distant cadence of instructors shouting orders. If Evans raised his voice, if he drew attention, the ledger would be discovered in seconds. There would be no explanation, no appeal. Possession alone would be enough to end her career and erase her father's name forever. She forced air through her nose, slow and controlled, even as sweat slid down her temple. Her fingers tingled where circulation was being cut off. She looked up at Evans, not pleading, not defiant measure. She saw it then, the hesitation. It was there in the way his grip faltered, just a fraction. In the micro-delay before his next breath. Janet remembered the rumor she had heard weeks earlier, passed quietly between recruits like contraband. Evans had requested emergency leave. His mother was dying. The request had been denied without explanation. Wilson needed his coffee, fetch it. His jacket pressed, his schedule cleared. He destroys everyone, Janet said, her voice low, pushed out through clenched teeth. Each word scraped her throat raw. You think you're safe. Evans's eyes hardened, but his breathing changed shallower, uneven. You're just a tool to him, she continued, keeping her voice steady despite the pain radiating up her arm. "When he's done with you, he'll discard you like trash. Same as the rest of us." His boot pressed down harder. White-hot pain flared, and Janet bit the inside of her cheek to keep from reacting. Blood filled her mouth, metallic and warm. Evans glanced instinctively toward the sound of Wilson's voice behind him. The Admiral was several meters away, berating a medic with theatrical contempt, one hand slicing the air. As he spoke, he wasn't looking. He never looked at Evans unless something was needed. Evans looked back at Janet. For a moment, his face was a battlefield loyalty colliding with something dangerously close to self-preservation. His jaw tightened. The tendons in his neck stood out. His eyes flicked once more toward Wilson, then down to the jacket. The decision happened without ceremony. Evans lifted his foot just long enough to grind sand over Janet's hand, burying it from view. In the same motion, his boot clipped the edge of the jacket. Something heavy slid free and dropped into the sand beside Janet's thigh. "Get up, Morrison," Evans barked suddenly, his voice loud, sharp, carrying authority. It cracked at the end despite his effort. "Stop malingering," the shift in tone drew attention. An instructor shouted, in agreement. Someone grabbed Janet by the shoulder. She reacted instantly. Using the momentum of being hauled upright, Janet's free hand closed around the object in the sand. The weight was unmistakable. Dense, solid. She tucked it into the cargo pocket of her trousers in the same fluid motion she used to regain her footing. Training took over. No wasted movement, no pause to check. Evans stepped back, face already resetting into professional disdain. He didn't look at her again. Janet staggered forward, sand clinging to her uniform, breath uneven but controlled. Her wrist throbbed violently, swelling beneath the skin, but she kept her hand flexing, working sensation back into her fingers. She dropped into position when ordered, shoulders under the boat, muscles screaming in protest. The ledger pressed against her thigh, a constant, undeniable presence. She carried the boat, she endured the cold. She followed orders with mechanical precision. No one noticed the additional weight, no one thought to check. As the sun dipped lower and the air grew colder, Janet focused on one thing only: survival. Hell Week was not finished. The evolutions would continue. The scrutiny would intensify. Discovery meant destruction, but the ledger was hers. Hidden in plain sight, soaked with seawater, buried in sand and sweat and exhaustion. The most incriminating evidence in the United States Navy row in the pocket of a recruit who refused to break. Hell Week ended without ceremony. There was no victory lap, no applause, only the slow, grinding realization that Janet Morrison was still standing when many others were gone. Her body paid the price. Salt water had eaten through layers of skin. It peeled away in pale sheets from her forearms and collarbone, raw and inflamed beneath. Her boots felt like vices clamped to her feet, each step sending a sharp protest up her tibias, where stress fractures had begun to sing their constant, high-pitched warning. When she lay still, the pain settled into a deep, throbbing ache. When she moved, it flared. Bright and punishing, she moved anyway. The barracks mattress sagged under her weight as she collapsed onto it during the so-called recovery weekend. Around her, other candidates lay in various states of ruin, bandaged, silent, staring at nothing. Janet waited until the lights were low and the cadence of breathing around her evened out. Only then did she slide her fingers beneath the thin fabric seam she had split days earlier, hands trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion so complete it bordered on dissociation. Inside the hollowed foam, wrapped in oilskin and duct tape, the ledger was still there, safe. Her jaw tightened as she pulled it free. The muscles along her cheek fluttered a tiny, involuntary tick she hadn't noticed developing until now. She forced her breathing to slow, 4 counts in through her nose, 6 out through parted lips, just as she had been taught. The book was heavier than it looked. She opened it carefully, as if it might detonate. At first glance, it was worse than she had imagined. Not codes, not abstractions, names, dates, account numbers. Routing instructions leading to offshore banks in jurisdictions designed to erase paper trails. Payments disguised as consulting fees from defense contractors whose logos she recognized from procurement briefings. Margins crowded with annotations written in a precise, arrogant hand. Wilson's hand detailing leverage, favors owed, careers ended. Her father's name appeared more than once. David Morrison, cleared, discredited, Neutralized, her fingers curled against the page until the paper creased. A thin line of blood welled where a fingernail split skin. She didn't notice. Her focus tunneled, vision narrowing as the implications stacked, one on top of another, compressing her chest until her next breath caught halfway in. Wilson hadn't just orchestrated corruption. He had documented it. Every bribe was framed as a victory. Every ruined life reduced to a footnote of operational success. The narcissism was staggering. The confidence absolute. Janet turned the final page. The date jumped out first 2 days from now. Project Acheron. Final payment. Her pulse kicked hard enough that she felt it in her throat. She read the entry again, slower this time, forcing herself to parse every word. The notes reference classified specifications, silent propulsion systems, next-generation naval platforms still buried deep within restricted access channels. This wasn't greed, it was betrayal. The realization settled over her with a cold clarity that cut through pain and fatigue alike. Wilson was selling the future operational advantage of the Navy to a foreign beer. The exchange was timed to perfection. Friday. Graduation ceremony. Class 232, a controlled environment, high-ranking attendance, ceremonial chaos. And immediately after, retirement, disappearance, millions laundered clean. Janet closed the ledger and pressed it to her chest. Her breathing went shallow. The walls of the barracks felt closer now, the air heavier. She couldn't take this to the gate, couldn't make a call. The base was already tightening. Extra patrols, unfamiliar faces in crisp uniforms, eyes scanning too carefully. Wilson's people. She moved before doubt could creep in. The gear locker smelled of oil, metal, and old sweat. Janet leaned against a rack of fins as her knees threatened to fold. Master Chief Reynolds looked up from an inventory crate, his weathered face etched with permanent lines earned over decades of service. One eyebrow lifted a fraction at the sight of her condition. She didn't speak. She opened the ledger to a single page and held it out. Reynolds took it, his thick fingers suddenly careful. His eyes moved left to right, then stopped. The color drained from his face so quickly, it was unmistakable. His jaw set, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "This is treason," he said quietly. The word seemed to scrape its way out of his throat. "High treason." Janet nodded once. The movement sent a flash of pain through her shin. She locked her knee to keep steady. "The exchange is Friday," she said, "at the ceremony." Her voice was hoarse but controlled. "We can't just arrest him. He's insulated. Judges, oversight boards, he's already bought them. If this stays internal, it disappears." Reynolds glanced toward the door, then back at her. His thumb brushed the worn edges of the seal trident pinned to his chest, a reflexive motion, almost reverent. "Morrison," he said, lowering his voice further, "if we do this, there's no turning back. We're not filing a report. We're declaring war on a 4-star Admiral." Janet met his eyes. Her expression didn't change, but something settled behind it, hard, immovable. "He declared war on us a long time ago," she replied. A beat passed between them. Then Reynolds exhaled slowly. Decision made. The locker room lights hummed overhead. Indifferent, Friday arrived with military precision. The base had been scrubbed clean and dressed for ceremony. Red, white, and blue bunting lined the reviewing stand. Flags snapped sharply in the coastal wind, their halyards humming under tension. Families filled the bleachers in press shirts and sun hats, scanning ranks of candidates with hopeful eyes, hands shading faces against the glare. Camera lenses tracked every movement, red tally lights blinking as network crews adjusted focus. Order reigned on the surface. Beneath it, pressure built. Admiral Wilson stood at the podium in immaculate dress whites, every ribbon aligned, every crease razor sharp. The gold braid on his cap caught the sun as he surveyed the crowd. His posture was effortless, practiced. When he began to speak, his voice carried easily over the parade ground, amplified and confident. Honor, courage, commitment, the words rolled out smooth, familiar. Applause followed on cue. Wilson's gaze drifted across the formations and paused. One space was empty. Janet Morrison's slot in the rank sat unfilled, a precise rectangle of absence. The corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly. A private satisfaction flickered in his eyes. He adjusted his stance, the movement subtle enough to pass as comfort. He assumed she had broken at last. Medical hold, voluntary drop. Another promising candidate ground down by reality. His fingers brushed the inner pocket of his jacket, confirming the weight of the envelope there. Thick paper. Classified specifications folded with care. The beer sat in the front row, expression neutral, posture diplomatic. To anyone watching, just another visiting official. To Wilson, the final step, the last transaction before a clean exit. He continued, voice rising, cadence tightening as he approached the rhetorical peak he had rehearsed. In the AV control room behind the stands, Master Chief Reynolds leaned over a console, his presence filling the tight space. The technician beside him stiffened slightly as Reynolds' shadow fell across the screen. Routine security inspection, Reynolds said, producing credentials without hurry. His tone was flat, authoritative. His eyes never stopped moving. Exit, secondary door, cable trunking. The technician nodded, swallowing, and turned back to his monitors. Below the stage, unseen, Janet moved. She wore service dress blues now, the fabric stiff against skin still tender from salt and abrasion. Each breath scraped lightly in her chest as she flattened herself against the dirt and crawled forward. Dust clung to her sleeves, loose cables brushed her cheek, insulation gritty against her jawline. She ignored the ache in her shins, the sharp complaint from her left foot when she shifted weight. She had learned this in training: low profile, controlled movement, silence measured in inches. Above her, polished shoes shifted, the muffled vibration of applause tremored through the floorboards. She paused, breath held, until the sound faded. Then she advanced again, muscles trembling not with fear, but with fatigue forced into obedience. The junction box came into view at last, metal casing, secured, but not sealed. Janet's fingers worked the latch with mechanical calm. Her hands shook once, then stilled as she anchored her wrist against the frame. She opened the panel and exposed the bundled cables feeding the main projector. She didn't cut power. She rerouted it. The thumb drive slid into the port with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the confined space. Her jaw tightened. A bead of sweat traced down her temple and dropped into the dust below. In the control room, Reynolds cleared his throat. "Seeing a minor latency issue on your feet," he said, tapping the screen lightly. "Mind if I run a quick diagnostic?" The technician nodded again, eyes flicking nervously toward the parade ground feet. On stage, Wilson leaned forward, hands braced on the podium. His voice swelled, carrying conviction sharpened by irony. "The Navy SEAL is a quiet professional," he declared. "We do not seek recognition, we seek only truth." Janet's lips parted beneath the stage, her breathing slowed. One finger hovered over the keyboard input, knuckle whitening as she pressed. "Let's give them some truth," she whispered. She hit enter. The projector screen behind Wilson flickered once, then changed. The first image snapped into focus. Ledger pages, scanned in high resolution. Names, dates, account numbers. Arrows and annotations unmistakable even from a distance. A murmur rippled through the bleachers, swelling as the slides advanced. Offshore transfers, defense contractors. Wire receipts stamped and verify. Wilson froze. The color drained from his face, the smug composure cracking as his eyes darted toward the screen. His hand tightened on the podium edge, fingers blanching against polished wood. The envelope in his pocket suddenly felt heavier, burning against his ribs. Gasps rose from the crowd, cameras swung, senators leaned forward. A reporter's mouth fell open mid-breath. Under the stage, Janet exhaled slowly for the first time in minutes. The massive jumbotron behind the podium flickered. For a fraction of a second, the American flag distorted colors bleeding, stars stretching before static clawed through the sound system. A sharp burst of interference cracked across the parade ground, slicing cleanly through the Admiral's amplified voice. Wilson stopped mid-sentence. He turned, brows knitting, a hand lifting slightly as if to steady the moment. The pause stretched just long enough to register. A thin, practiced smile tugged at his mouth. "Technical difficulties," he said, forcing a chuckle into the microphone. The sound came out brittle. "Stand by." A few nervous laughs rippled through the bleachers, then the screen stabilized. The image that replaced the flag was stark and unmistakable. A Cayman Islands bank statement, blown up to fill the entire display. Account numbers ran in neat columns, transfer amounts stacked into the millions. At the top, clear and center, was a name, Admiral Henry Wilson. The breath went out of the crowd in a single, collective exhale. Somewhere in the stands, a woman covered her mouth with both hands. A senator in the front row half rose from his seat, eyes locked on the screen, as if trying to will the image away. Wilson's smile collapsed. The blood drained from his face so fast it left a faint mottling along his jaw. His eyes twitched once, then snapped back to the screen. The image changed. A scanned page slid into view, yellowed paper, tight handwriting. The camera zoomed slightly, centering a single line. Frame Morrison. He's getting too close to the propulsion deal. The words hung there, silent and lethal. A sound tore through the crowd, not applause, not shouting, but raw disbelief. Senators stood fully now, jackets tugged open as if they needed air. Camera shutters hammered, red tally lights multiplied as every network cut to a live feed. Wilson spun toward the AV booth, one hand clawing at the podium edge. His knuckles went white. A vein stood out along his temple, pulsing. "Cut the feed," he shouted, his voice cracking through the speakers. "Cut it now," the command echoed uselessly. The images kept coming. Still photographs appeared in rapid sequence. Wilson seated in private rooms with known foreign intelligence intermediaries. Faces partially blurred, timestamps sharp. Metadata overlays marked locations, dates, GPS coordinates. Each slide landed like a hammer blow, precise and methodical. Wilson's breathing turned shallow, his lips parted, then pressed together again, as if he were trying to swallow words back down. The final image dissolved into video, dashcam footage. Grainy, low light, unmistakably real. Wilson's official staff vehicle idled at a curb, the rear door opened. A man stepped into frame and passed a briefcase through the window. Wilson's hand reached out, accepted it, pulled it inside. The case popped open just long enough to show stacks of cash bound in blue security bands. A murmur surged, then died as the implication settled. In the front row, the man posing as a visiting diplomat pushed back his chair. His movements were abrupt, poorly controlled. He scanned left, then right. Calculating, he stood. Two military police officers stepped into his path, boots planting in unison. Their hands rested near their holsters, not threatening, just final. One of them gave a short nod toward Master Chief Reynolds, who stood near the stage stairs, arms crossed, jaw set like stone. The man sat back down. Wilson remained alone at the podium. The weight of the silence pressed down on him. No applause, no murmurs. Just the faint hiss of the sound system and the distant cry of seabirds beyond the base perimeter. His shoulders sagged, just a fraction. The envelope in his jacket pocket seemed to drag him forward, pulling at the fabric. His mouth opened, closed, no sound came out. From the side of the stage, a figure stepped into view. Janet Morrison walked out from behind the curtain. She moved at a measured pace, heels striking the deck in steady cadence. Her service dress blues were immaculate, every line sharp, every insignia aligned. Her cover sat square on her head. Her face was calm, almost unreadable, save for the slight tightening at the corners of her eyes. The crowd parted around her without realizing it, attention narrowing as she crossed the short distance to the podium. Wilson stared at her as if seeing a ghost. His lower lip trembled once before he caught it between his teeth. Janet stopped beside him. The microphone was still live. She leaned in just enough for the pickup to catch her voice. Her hands rested lightly on the podium edge, fingers relaxed, controlled. "You asked me why I avoid you, Admiral," she said. Her eyes never left his. Wilson moved before thought could catch him. The polished calm evaporated, replaced by something feral. His shoulder dipped, his weight shifting forward in a sudden, reckless lunge that ripped the last illusion of control from the stage. The movement was raw too fast, too crude for ceremony, and it drew a sharp intake of breath from the front rows. His hand went to his ankle, leather creaked. A compact pistol cleared the holster, black metal flashing under the lights. The sight of it on a ceremonial stage, in front of flags and families, hit like a physical blow. A four-star admiral carrying a concealed weapon was not just improper. It was a catastrophic breach of protocol, a silent admission of premeditation. "You traitorous little witch!" Wilson screamed. Spittle flew from his mouth. His face contorted, one eye twitching violently as his finger tightened along the frame of the weapon. The barrel began to rise. Janet Morrison did not move. Her breathing stayed even, controlled, a slow expansion beneath pressed wool. Her eyes remained fixed on Wilson's center mass, tracking him with the detached precision drilled into her bones. One heel shifted back a fraction of an inch, grounding her stance. Before the pistol reached eye level, the Admiral's world collapsed. A heavy impact slammed into his back, driving the air from his lungs in a sharp, involuntary grunt. Master Chief Reynolds hit him like a breaching charge, all mass and momentum. The podium shuddered as Wilson's face smashed into the wood, the microphone squealing as it was knocked sideways. The pistols skittered across the stage, clattering against a metal support. The crowd erupted. Screams tore through the bleachers, chairs scraped. Secret Service agents surged toward the senators, hands firm on shoulders, heads down as they moved them off axis. Camera operators stumbled back, lenses shaking as instinct fought with training. Reynolds had Wilson pinned. One massive forearm locked across the Admiral's upper back, driving him down. The other hand wrenched Wilson's arm behind him, rotating the shoulder until the joint protested. Wilson howled, the sound raw and unfiltered, his cheek grinding against the podium edge. Blood smeared into the lacquer from a split lip. Military police flooded the stage in seconds, boots pounding, radios barking clipped commands. One officer kicked the pistol farther away and dropped a knee beside it, weapon already drawn but disciplined, muzzle down. Reynolds' voice cut through the chaos, amplified by the still-live microphone. "Admiral Patrick Wilson," he barked, each word deliberate, anchored. "You are under arrest for treason, espionage, and conduct unbecoming an officer." The charges landed like a verdict. MPS hauled Wilson upright. His immaculate dressed whites were ruined dust ground into the fabric, crimson streaking his collar. His cover had fallen away, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His chest heaved, breath hitching in ugly bursts as the reality finally breached his fury. His eyes found Janet. They burned with hatred, unfocused and wild, searching for something to latch onto. His jaw trembled as he strained against the MPS grip, tendons standing out along his neck. "You're nothing," he shouted, voice cracking. "You're a recruit. I am the Navy." The words rang hollow even as he spoke them. Janet stepped forward. She stood straight, shoulders squared, hands at her sides. The sunlight caught the edge of her insignia, sharp and clean. She looked down at him not with triumph, not with anger but with a steady, measured calm that stripped the last of his illusion away. She picked up the microphone. The metal was warm from his grip. She adjusted it slightly, just enough to bring it back to center. "You're not the Navy, Patrick," she said. Using his first name was surgical. It peeled the rank from him, layer by layer, leaving only the man beneath. Wilson's eyes flickered at the sound, confusion bleeding into rage. "You're just a criminal in a costume," she continued, her voice low, unwavering, "and you look disgusting." For a moment, there was nothing but the wind off the Pacific and the distant cry of gulls. Then the MPS turned him. They dragged Wilson off the stage, his boots scraping helplessly across the deck. Black scuff marks streaked across the seal of the United States Navy, marring it in uneven lines. His protests dissolved into incoherent snarls as he was pulled out of view. Janet remained where she was. The stage slowly cleared around her agents, officers, officials moving with controlled urgency, but she didn't track them. Her gaze stayed forward, her jaw set, breath finally leaving her lungs in a long, silent exhale. The war was over. 3 months later, the gavel fell with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. Patrick Wilson stood motionless as the sentence was read, his shoulders rigid beneath a prison-issued uniform that hung where tailored whites once did perfectly. The judge's voice was clinical, precise, each word placed with legal finality. Life imprisonment at Leavenworth. No possibility of parole. Asset forfeiture in full. The language of the law stripped him down faster than any public disgrace ever could. Wilson didn't look at the gallery. His jaw tightened once, a small tremor passing through the muscle as the weight of permanence settled in. When the judge ordered him remanded to custody, to federal marshals closed in. Metal cuffs snapped around his wrists. For the first time, Wilson's posture sagged, just slightly, like a structure that had finally accepted collapse. Across the aisle, an empty chair bore a small brass placard. "David Morrison, Commander, USN Restore." The Navy's apology was entered into the record moments later. Formal, unambiguous, rank restored posthumously, pension reinstated to the estate. The words could not resurrect the dead, but they carried the institutional acknowledgement that truth had teeth and it had finally bitten back. Janet Morrison did not watch Wilson leave. Her eyes were fixed on the seal embossed behind the bench. Her fingers curled once against her palm, nails pressing into skin, grounding her in the present. When the courtroom began to stir, she turned and walked out without ceremony. The Pacific air met her like a held breath finally released. At Coronado, the beach stretched white and open, the tide rolling in with steady indifference to human affairs. The sun hovered low, bleeding gold into bands of purple and deep blue. Janet stood barefoot at the edge of the sand, boots tucked under one arm, the other resting loosely at her side. She wore Type 3 camouflage, sleeves down, collar squared. On her chest, catching the last light of day, the seal trident gleamed gold against fabric, sharp and unmistakable, the Budweiser. It sat there without fanfare, no music, no applause. Just weight, history, cost. She inhaled slowly, salt and kelp filling her lungs, then let the breath go. Her shoulders remained steady, but her jaw flexed as something inside her finally loosened. She had graduated not as a symbol, not as an exception but as the top candidate in her class. The teams had tested her without mercy. She had endured. She had earned it. Footsteps approached from behind, measured and familiar. Master Chief Reynolds stopped beside her, hands hooked into the straps of his cover. His gaze stayed on the horizon, where the sun kissed the water. They stood like that for a moment, neither rushing to speak. He extended a thin folder. Manila, unmarked, orders came down, he said quietly. Pentagon, Intelligence Directorate. Janet took the folder. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She didn't open it. Her thumb traced the edge once, then stilled. They think your talents are wasted carrying a rifle, Reynolds added. No judgment, just information. Janet's eyes dropped to the trident. The gold reflected the dying light, steady, unyielding. She closed her fingers around the folder, then lifted her gaze back to the water. The ocean answered nothing. It never did. She handed the folder back. With all due respect, Master Chief, she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, the same tone she'd used under surf torture and sleep deprivation. I didn't go through Hell Week to sit behind a desk. Reynolds accepted the folder without comment. The corner of his mouth twitched, then, slowly, he smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't loud, but it was real. I figured you'd say that, he said. He tucked the folder under his arm. Get your gear, Morrison. Team for wheels up at 0800. Janet nodded once, no hesitation, no ceremony. She turned from the ocean and started toward the team room, boots dangling from her hand, her stride even and unhurried. The sand shifted under her feet, but she didn't break pace. The trident caught the last fragment of sunlight before the horizon swallowed it whole. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a seal, and she had work to do. If you were captivated by Janet's story, don't miss what's next. Subscribe now and join us for more incredible true tales of courage and justice.